We bring you a critical moment from Capitol Hill, one that cuts to the heart of what this administration seems determined to dismantle. Democratic Congresswoman Laura Gillen of New York took the floor in a hearing that should concern every American who breathes air and drinks water. Gillen posed the question the EPA under Trump-era deregulation never wanted to answer. What is the true cost of cutting corners?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gillen from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. Thank you to all the witnesses, again, who have held on for this very long hearing. Thank you for your testimony today. So I represent the South Shore of Long Island, which is adjacent to New York City. It is the home of legacy contamination, including in Administrator Lee Zeldin's district. We had the Gorman Plume and other legacy contamination throughout Long Island, where we've now seen cancer clusters, where like everybody on the block gets breast cancer, men, women, everybody. And we're also a community that has been devastated by the 9/11 World Trade Center attack. Pretty much, I would say everybody in my district who lived there at that time knows someone who was killed on that day or someone who has died since that time. So we talked a lot today about the need for expediency, but balancing with that the concern for human life and safety and concern for preserving our environmental beauty and our environment that supports all of our lives. And Dr. Myberg, you talked a lot about we have to make a value judgment about rushing and the cost of rushing and how that could have a much more devastating impact than the cost associated with waiting. We saw that with 9/11, where the EPA administrator at the time came out right away and told everybody, don't worry about it. The air is safe. You're all fine. Go back to work. I understand we wanted to get the economy going again, but as someone who worked blocks away from the World Trade Center, now I have to worry. And now we've seen my friend's husband who worked on the pile and was told that it was safe to do that. And he's dead. And there's a whole new branch of science about 9/11 related cancers. So my question, I guess, would be first to you, Dr. Myberg. How do you weigh the costs? How can the EPA effectively weigh the costs of expediency? Because yes, I want to win the space race, but I don't want my neighbors, my friends, my fellow Americans to die because something was put out there that they were exposed to. And now, again, with 9/11, every day I have to fight here to fund the World Trade Center health program because we still don't know how many thousands and thousands of people might develop one of these cancers.
Thank you very much for that question, and it sort of illustrates the dilemma that I think this committee has been struggling with, and I think on a bipartisan basis about how to make these kind of balance and judgments, because I think, knowing that the official who was the administrator at that time, I think if she had it to do over again, she would have expressed herself somewhat differently, because there clearly are and continue to be real risks. At the same time, there is something to be said about the need to make decisions, and you have to simply do the best you can. You try to derive, as Charlotte said, you try to make the process work as reliably and dependably as you can, and then to make sure that in that process you have access to the best information you can get, and then make the decisions you have to make at the time. In short, for example, in the case of Superfund, you sometimes do short-term removals just to mitigate the immediate risk, but the long-term thing to mitigate long-term risks simply takes longer and more planning. And the best way you can do that is to get the best possible talent you can get into the agency to do the objective assessments, to make then those judgments that are based on the best science that's available, as everyone has said. And so my principal concern with this is simply to protect and preserve the integrity of the agency in setting up a structure that makes those decisions based on science. And that's, in some ways, to me, at the heart of my testimony, is that the agency's role that has been given by Congress is a critical one, and you want to make sure they're as well positioned as they can to make difficult judgments.
Thank you, Doctor. And so I joined this committee because it tends to be one of the most bipartisan committees, and I do think we've heard some consistent things, despite some of the back and forth today, that there needs to be more investment and more resources with the EPA. I think all of you agreed with that. We need to make sure that the EPA has the proper resources to execute its job. We want to streamline processes. Certainly, I think, Dr. Myberg, you also talked about, or somebody else talked about, redundancy where there are different standards, and sometimes that can actually frustrate industry even more. I know in New York, I think we have among the most stringent PFAS standards, which may not be the same in another state, so that might make all of your jobs in the private sphere much more difficult. So is there a way we can convene experts like you to try to create a way where we can all be happy, where we know that we are streamlining the processes, eliminating redundancies, but yet making sure we're taking the extra care to make sure we're not going to be releasing contaminants? Because from the corporate perspective, that's not helpful either, because you'll be bankrupt if something goes the wrong way.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you.
And so, we come to the end of what can only be described as a sobering afternoon on Capitol Hill. Representative Laura Gillen, a freshman Democrat representing New York's 4th District on the South Shore of Long Island, did something increasingly rare in these polarized times. She made the abstract concrete. She didn't speak in policy jargon. She spoke in funerals. She spoke in cancer clusters. She spoke in the quiet terror of wondering whether the air you breathed 24 years ago is still killing you today. Lee Zeldin, the very name Gillen invoked, now sits as EPA administrator under the Trump administration. The same Lee Zeldin who represented Long Island, who knows intimately the Grumman plume contamination, the PFAS crisis, the legacy of industrial negligence that has turned neighborhoods into epidemiological case studies. And yet, the agency he now leads has embarked on what can only be characterized as a systematic dismantling of the regulatory infrastructure designed to prevent the next ground zero, the next cancer cluster, the next generation of widows. Gillen's invocation of September 11th was not rhetorical flourish, it was evidence. When Christine Todd Whitman, then EPA administrator under George W. Bush, stood in the ash and smoke of Lower Manhattan and declared the air safe to breathe, she set in motion a public health catastrophe we are still counting. The World Trade Center Health Program now monitors over 130,000 responders and survivors. More than 5,400 have been diagnosed with cancers linked to that exposure. The death toll from 9/11-related illness is now approaching, and by some estimates exceeding the 2,977 who perished that terrible morning. When Dr. Mayberg, to his credit, acknowledged that the administrator would have expressed herself somewhat differently if given another chance, he was offering the most diplomatic possible admission of catastrophic institutional failure. Somewhat differently does not bring back the dead. Somewhat differently does not shrink the tumors. Somewhat differently is the language of liability lawyers, not public servants. They are policy choices with body counts. Every environmental review shortened is a question unasked. Every inspection eliminated is a hazard undetected. Every scientist pushed out of the EPA is expertise we will desperately need when the next crisis emerges, and it will emerge. Gillen, notably, extended an olive branch. She spoke of bipartisanship. She acknowledged that even industry suffers when regulations are inconsistent, when standards vary state by state, when uncertainty breeds litigation rather than innovation. She asked, in good faith, whether there was a path where we could all be happy. But here is the uncomfortable truth. We cannot all be happy. Not when one side defines happiness as quarterly earnings and the other defines it as children who grow up without leukemia. Not when the negotiation is between corporate convenience and human lives. There are some asymmetries that cannot be split down the middle. The chairman's gavel fell. The gentle lady's time has expired, he said. But for the people of Long Island, for the first responders still dying from ground zero exposure, for the communities downstream and downwind from the next industrial accident waiting to happen, their time is not expired. Their time is running out. And the question this hearing leaves us with is not whether we can afford robust environmental protection. The question is whether we can afford the cost of pretending we cannot.